everybody. Tuesday night, Q&A night. The date today, I think, is 13th of October. So it's the anniversary of the passing away of King Bhumibol of Thailand, Rama IX, who was a great patron of Buddhism and Buddhists in Thailand and around the world. So it's an occasion where he's recollecting his life. Many teachers have commented on his life and works, comparing him to a bodhisattva, one who is dedicated to enlightenment and the enlightenment of other beings as well. So a very special figure in Thai history and Thai Buddhist history as well. So tonight we have some questions. First question.
Dear Luang Por, I am a lay devotee and I observe the 8 precepts once a week on the Uposatha day and the 5 precepts on a daily basis. As I would like to intensify my Dhamma practice, what is your advice if I undertake 7 out of the 8 precepts by dropping the 6th precept, that is, not eating after the specific time on these non-Uposatha days?
That's a question that is quite common. That sometimes a doubt arises in the practitioner's mind. Should I keep the 5 precepts or the 8 precepts? When and how? And the Buddha encouraged us to make the 5 precepts central to our life, to our practice, for the development of wholesome dhammas and abandoning unwholesome dhammas, developing mindfulness, developing kindness, compassion, respect for life and property, sobriety, and so on. But then many people have that aspiration to deepen their practice, and particularly to develop meditation, and they realize it is helpful to reduce the amount of contact with the sensual world and take on maybe the 8 precepts to limit and simplify their lives. But perhaps due to family commitments, work commitments and so on, maybe keeping the 8 precepts isn't always possible or convenient. So we do have to make these decisions sometimes and accept on a normal day 5 precepts are good enough, and they are good enough. It can bring one all the way, or support one's practice all the way to stream entry. But if one has the energy and the interest and the faith to discipline oneself more, simplify one's life more, practice more renunciation, well then the 8 precepts are an option. So many people will keep them for periods of time. So a retreat, going on a meditation retreat, or staying in a monastery, or for a period of 1 week or 3 months, or perhaps most commonly is once a week. One chooses a day, Saturday or Sunday is most common nowadays, and decides to keep the 8 precepts for that 1 day and 1 night, once a week, as a way of intensifying one's practice and supporting one's practice, shedding the burden of some of our sensual attachment. But that doesn't preclude us from making our own personal rules and precepts in the practice as well. There's nothing wrong with that. Monks do this all the time. We make our own rules for ourselves in the monastery, how much we're going to sleep, how much we eat, how we're going to spend our time. And lay people do this also. So they might modify the precepts. So like you say, one might decide keeping the 6th precept isn't convenient, but I don't find it difficult to give up watching shows and music and wearing makeup and adornments, jewelry, sleeping on a simple bed. I can't, there's no problem with that, but maybe for whatever reason, eating in the evening is harder to give up, sometimes through family commitments. So, it's your choice to keep 7 precepts. If you can do it mindfully and know that you're doing that, well, that's your choice. But don't make the mistake of thinking you're keeping the 8 precepts if you are eating in the evening. Obviously not. Some people keep the 8 precepts because they're still working, but they're dedicated enough to keep the 8 precepts, which is a very, or to wish to keep the 8 precepts, which is a very noble thing. But their work routine doesn't allow it very easily because they have a lunch break between 12 and 1, and the 8 precepts require you not to eat after midday, as in a monastery or on a retreat. So again, they have to adjust, and they have their main meal of the day at 12 o'clock, between 12 and 1. They may have a breakfast in the morning, and then a main meal at 12 to 1, and then they eat nothing after that. So strictly speaking, they're not keeping the 8 precepts, but in terms of training and practice, it serves a useful purpose, as long as they're clear, well, if conditions are ideal, I'll eat before midday, not after. And you can train yourself in this way. You can make precepts around, say, a modern one might be when you use your mobile phone or computer, and maybe certain parts of the day you turn it off. Don't use it. It's not a part of the 8 precepts, but it can be a precept or a rule you take on to support your practice, to simplify your life, free up time, energy for meditation. So it's okay to experiment, but just be clear what you're doing, and don't say if you're keeping 7 precepts, we'll be clear you're not keeping the 8 precepts. Same with, say, the 3rd precept. Sometimes people say, I'm keeping the 8 precepts, but they're still sleeping in the same room as their sexual partner or their husband, their wife, which is not strictly speaking the 8 precepts. If you keep the 8 precepts, you have to sleep alone, separate somewhere, ideally in a completely separate building. Or some people go out into the yard and sleep in a tent or a caravan on the night that they keep the 8 precepts, because you're wanting to reduce sensuality, temptation, so you have to be clear on that. So as long as one is mindful and clear on one's intention, what one's doing, well, one can, say in the case of the 6th precept, drop that and keep 7 precepts. And some people find it hard even just to keep the 5 precepts, so they reduce it. Some people are not yet ready to give up their alcohol, so they keep the 4 precepts. Or some people are not ready to give up lying, so they keep the 4 precepts. Some people still kill bugs and small creatures, so they're not keeping that precept. We start where we are in our practice with whatever level of commitment to training ourselves we can take on. So 4 precepts is better than no precepts, but we can develop a goal. So our goal may be to complete and keep the 5 precepts for one day, and then do it again and again until it becomes a good habit. And the same with the 8 precepts. One might make that aspiration that one wants to keep the 8 precepts fully, but one's not yet able to commit, say, can't keep the 6 precepts, so one has the long-term goal to keep the 8 precepts, but at this time one is aware, I can't keep the 6 precepts, so you're just clear in your understanding of that.
Dear Ajahn, sometimes I see people's faces or visions of different places when I meditate. How should I practice with this?
Seeing visions, faces, places, sometimes hearing sounds. This is part of the experience of training in meditation, particularly developing mindfulness, states of samadhi. So it's important to develop a wise attitude around things like this, and all our teachers remind us to be cautious with visions, because the majority of, say, mental images and sounds, smells can also come up in that way. The majority are what we call sankharas, mental sankharas. It's the proliferation of the mind. The mind makes images. What the mind does is based largely on memory. So images we store from daily life, they go into the mind stores them up, and often we're not very mindful, so we're not aware that we're storing up images, and we can develop attachments around them. And then when the conditions are right, they pop up. And when we practice meditation, you'll see that. All kinds of memories, images, visual images, sometimes memories of thoughts, sounds, even smells, touch, experiences like that can pop up into the mind. And the majority of it is just old memories, or the mind just throwing up through its own proliferation. So the teachers encourage us to always establish mindfulness, full awareness, clear comprehension in the present moment, whether we're meditating or whether we're not meditating, which is a good starting point, because it helps you to pay attention to what's going on in your experience, to know it, and then from there you can develop some wisdom around that. So much of the images of whatever it is, faces, people, whatever, having established mindfulness, you can see one thing is true: they arise, they pass away, they're impermanent. And Ajahn Chah encouraged us to develop the anicca sanya, the perception of impermanence around mental phenomena during meditation or just during daily life, to observe the changing nature of your mind. And visions of people or places come up. You can see they arise, they pass away, and they're not sure, they're not certain. And that grounds you with some wisdom. Helps, because sometimes images can be very deluding or come up together with emotions. So we can have fear, worry, desire, fantasies, imagination. So keeping mindfulness and reflecting on impermanence grounds you in a very good way to not get too deluded or caught up in images. When I first went to Thailand and then entered the monastery, before I'd even become an anagarika, I was already meditating many hours a day in the jungle and living very simply. I found my mind was full of all kinds of random images coming up. As soon as I closed my eyes to meditate, it'd be full of all kinds of images. But I quickly realized most of them were not useful at all. They're just mental phenomena arising, passing away. And I just learned to develop a more detached awareness to them, trusting that as I developed mindfulness, those images would bother me less and less. And that proved to be correct. So after about 3 months, I found my mind changed. The mindfulness was improving, the sense of samadhi and calm was improving, so then images didn't bother me and they didn't come up so much, to my relief. But I found many other meditators had similar experience. I wasn't alone. And it's particularly when you go to live in a quiet place, then you bring along your baggage, a lot of memories and accumulated attachments. So it'll come out when you meditate. So keeping mindfulness and recollecting impermanence is a very good way to deal with images. But as one progresses in the practice, maybe one's level of mindfulness improves, one's self-confidence, one can trust one's judgment a little bit more through the practice, and also through having some good teachers if you know them. You might find as the mind becomes more refined, states of samadhi arise, particularly what we call upajjhara samadhi, access concentration. Well, sometimes some people will have images arise that are more clear, more prominent in their experience than all these other more random images that you might notice when you're meditating. And they may seem to have some meaning. You know, you see a person's face. What does that mean? Well, if it doesn't mean anything, again, it's just an image that's arising, passing away. You can see it. It's just an impermanent mental phenomena. But when the mind does settle down more into samadhi, sometimes images arise that may have some meaning, or may not. So you can be prepared for that, but be very cautious, because what happens quite often is people get deluded by images, and they think maybe they're someone special because they're having various visions arising in their meditation, or they attach to the visions and they want to see visions of heaven or hell or other places, or know this, know that. It can be very fascinating, alluring, and distracting from the practice. So again, just to be cautious, but to be aware these things can come up. And it depends on the person. Some people seem to get them more than others. But if one meditates regularly, well, maybe it becomes a regular feature in your meditation. You see things, you hear things, see things during your meditation, but always keep that cautious awareness. It's only an image, it's only a sound, it arises, passes away. Some people get used to seeing images and then it seems to have meaning for them. So I used to know one nun in a forest monastery who would meditate many hours a day and seemed to have good samadhi, and she would always know who's coming to the monastery the next day. Before they had arrived, she'd know, and she'd tell the others to get ready. This person's coming, that person's coming. And she became quite well known for that. She was very accurate. She knew who was thinking of the monastery, who's planning to come, and it always seemed to be true. So, and the day myself and some other monks went to visit the teacher in that monastery, she had predicted that as well. So occasionally it does happen. Those people have that skill. But they tend to be people who are meditating a lot and have good sila, and have some grounding in sila, samadhi and panya. So occasionally images, things do seem to give us some information. It may be a warning or just letting us know something. It does happen, but treat it with caution and don't look for it and don't expect it in your practice, because not everyone gets that or has those experiences. What also may arise, particularly if you experience more samadhi, is images that are helpful for developing both samadhi and wisdom. So, common one is to see parts of the body, say, or to see some aspect of one of the four elements. So people sometimes, it seems to arise spontaneously at first, their mind becomes calm and then they have an image of themselves as a corpse, or they see the earth element or the water element, or they see a particular body part, so the hair of the head or a bone or the whole skeleton, for example. There's many different experiences people have. And these are, slightly different than the more sort of images of just faces and places and things. These are like coming from the peaceful, quiet mind. Sometimes it's people who have meditated before. In the past, it's coming up as a sort of a sign that they can contemplate, and they take up that image, and some people become quite skilled in maintaining that image. So if one can maintain it regularly, it becomes what we call an ukkaha nimitta, a vision that you can turn to regularly as a meditation practice. A very common one is vision of the bones or the skeleton of the body. It's a very common one. And you'll hear stories sometimes of monks or nuns practicing, seeing the bones regularly to the point where they're focusing on this nimitta all the time, and to the point where when they're contemplating that nimitta, they're not interested in their other senses. So you hear the stories of the monk walking up and down contemplating the bones, and somebody walks past and they don't know whether it's a man or a woman, they're just seeing a bag of bones going past. And that's someone who's developed maybe what we call patipaga nimitta, where they develop yukaha nimitta to the point where they can really focus their one-pointed state of mind and completely absorb into that contemplation of the body. And with that contemplation, they're developing also anicca sanya and the asupa sanya, seeing the body as impermanent, as not self, as unattractive. All of this is helping to develop wisdom and understanding, to let go of sakkaya ditthi, the attachment to the view that the body is self, permanent, lasting self. But, particularly in the beginning of the practice, don't make too much out of visions. Most of them are just random, most of them are not very helpful, they're more distracting. So just maintain mindfulness, contemplate impermanence, let them go. They arise, they cease, just like dreams, different thoughts. If it seems to have some meaning for you, well, you can note that, note it, but then let it go again.
Dear Ajahn, in the verses of recollection of the Buddha, what does the phrase Vidya Charana Sampanno mean?
Recollection of the Buddha is a very worthy meditation subject. Every night when we do our chanting, whether it's in Pali or in English like tonight, then we recite the verse, there's the 9 qualities of the Buddha that we recollect. So Vicca Charana Sampanno are one of those. Vicca literally means knowledge. Charana means conduct. So we say impeccable in conduct and understanding, or conduct and knowledge. Sometimes they translate it as perfect in knowledge and conduct, complete in knowledge and conduct. As you would expect, for the qualities of a Buddha, a supreme awakened being, self-enlightened, teacher of humans and gods, the qualities of the Buddha, they are appropriate for a Buddha. So the Buddha has appropriate conduct. The word jarana, I think, comes from the root meaning to move, or the way we move. So it refers really to the legs of a human being, because that's what we move with. So it's like, it's the conduct that brings you to nibbana, to enlightenment, and is fitting for someone who has attained enlightenment, because the Buddha is fully enlightened. So his conduct reflects that. The texts divided up into a number of different characteristics. So there's 15 jarana. So first is sila. So the Buddha keeps the sila of a Buddhist monk, the patimokkha sila, all the different rules, training rules. He's complete with that. He's perfect in his training and practice of sila. So the Buddha himself didn't really need to study the patimokkha rules, the monastic discipline. He already had it. And from his own wisdom and experience, he could pass it on to others. That's the first. Another 3 of the qualities that we say are conduct, the right conduct for a Buddha, are the apannaka patipata. These are 3 teachings that the Lumpo-cha used to emphasize over and over again. Indriya samvara, sense restraint. Bhojane matanyuta, knowing moderation in eating and consumption. Charkaryanu yoga, dedication to wakefulness and developing the awakened state of mind. So Buddha has these complete practice. The Buddha is always, eats in moderation. The Buddha is always mindful, awake, alert. The Buddha is always restrained in the use of his senses, 6 senses. Then there's another set of Dhammas that are included in Jhananas, the 7 Saddhammas, or Saddha Dhammas. And they include having saddha, faith. Obviously the Buddha has faith in enlightenment, in the quality of enlightenment. The Buddha is complete with the qualities of hiriyottapa, sense of shame, fear of wrongdoing, complete with wisdom, panya, complete with learning. He's a bahusutta. He's like somebody who has studied and learned what they need to learn for enlightenment. Another 4 qualities that make up jhana are the 4 rupa jhanas, the first 4 jhanas. The Buddha is complete with those, and so if you read the sutras, you hear, say like when the Buddha died, just before he died, he entered first jhana, then second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana, and then back to first jhana, and then withdrew. So he's complete with that skill in entering, leaving jhana. Can do it without effort and at will, as you would expect for somebody who teaches this path. They're skilled in it. So all his conduct reflected his own enlightenment experience, the peace, the wisdom, the compassion, the purity. It was there. So a very good example to others. So many people would get faith just seeing the Buddha, his presence, peaceful presence, calm, whether he's speaking or he's silent, sitting, walking. It would be enough to inspire people. Some people would get so much confidence they're sure he's enlightened just seeing him. Partly that's his conduct. And this conduct supports the arising of knowledge, and it's the knowledge of enlightenment. But if you read the Buddha's life story, on the night of his enlightenment, he developed 3 main knowledges. Pubeni Vasanu Satiyana, knowledge of the recollection of past lives. So through developing states of stillness, jhana, he could then recollect all his past lives and understand the process by which beings are born and die, what we call samsara, according to their karma. And then the second knowledge was what karma leads to the birth in which realm for a being, whether you're born in a human realm as a result of your karma, or hell realm, or heaven realm. That clarity to understand and see that in the behavior of others, and when they die, where they'll be reborn, which comes out in his teachings. It's not just a theory or belief, it's something he has from direct knowledge, vichara. But the most important knowledge on the night of his enlightenment was the third, which is asava kaya yana, the knowledge of the ending or the destruction of the asavas. Enlightenment, no more greed, anger, delusion, no more wrong views, wrong thinking, no more suffering for a Buddha. And this is the most important knowledge human beings can develop, even though often in the world it's not valued, it's forgotten or ignored. We put more knowledge on, more value on worldly knowledge. So we go to universities and study and learn many things. How to make money, how to improve the world, make the world go round. And all of this can have its value, but it's not quite the same as the knowledge that frees the mind, completely frees the mind from suffering. That's the kind of knowledge a Buddha has, and an Arahant also develops. So knowledge and conduct are what we're aiming to develop, even if we don't become a Buddha. Becoming an Arahant also develops these similar qualities. Maybe one thing I add is that when you recollect the Buddha, sometimes it's good to read the sutras or the text just to clarify, like your question, vichara charana sampanna, what does it mean? get some understanding of the basic meaning of these terms, but then when you actually meditate, many people meditate recollecting the Buddha just reciting the Pali words, so they'll chant the chant, Iti piso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho vijja charana sampano, and sometimes over and over again in a form of repetition. So people will chant for 9 repetitions of the virtues, chanting the virtues of the Buddha, or 108, or whatever number seems appropriate. Sometimes on their birthday, we'll send people off to chant, say it's your 50th birthday, you say, go and chant the recollection of the virtues of the Buddha 50 times. Because it's both a meditation and a recollection of our teacher and the qualities of the teacher. Same with the word Buddho, which comes from that same group of 9 qualities of the Buddha. Buddho, one who is awakened, the awakened knowledge of the Buddha. Buddho. You can just recite Buddho, 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 Buddho as a meditation, and you're also recollecting the Buddha at the same time. One of our teachers, Lumpur Bunna, one of Ajahn Anand's teachers, is famous for, when he was a younger monk, he had the aspiration to go to Bodh Gaya in India on pilgrimage. This is many, many years ago. And as soon as he established that aspiration, and I think there was an invitation by some lay people to help him get across to India, give him means of transport, he said this vision of the Buddha arose in his mind. And even when his eyes were open, he would see it. So when he was walking on arms round, he'd see the Buddha walking ahead. Sitting meditation, he'd see him. Just during his daily activities, he kept seeing the Buddha. He said that vision lasted all the way until he reached India, Bodh Gaya. He said it arose out of his faith and then the practice of mindfulness, recollecting the Buddha. A very powerful experience for him and very happy experience for him, recollecting the Buddha over and over again, all the way from Thailand to India. Maybe something slightly reminiscent of that. When I remember one year we went to India with Lumpur Anand as a group of monks and lay people, and as happens in an airplane, you get turbulence, and when there's turbulence, people get worried, afraid. So the staff of Thai Airways came to Ajahn Anand and said, can you help do something? They saw all these monks, can you help do something to help calm people down, because they're very upset, nervous, afraid. So we got everyone chanting Iti piso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho on the plane. So maybe that's happened elsewhere as well, I don't know, but it's the only time I've ever been on an aeroplane where you got all the people on the aeroplane, a couple of hundred people chanting Iti piso bhagava, flying over India. So for me that was a very nice memory.
And the last question this evening. Dear Ajahn, how do women ordain as nuns? What are the steps for a layperson to do so? And where can they do this?
Well, there are, since the time of the Buddha, have been many women who have that aspiration to follow the Buddha and ordain, right up to the present day. In the Western world, the numbers of places where you can ordain is increasing all the time, although currently in lockdown and with the current situation, maybe it's not the most convenient time to go searching for a monastery to ordain as a woman, because you can't travel anywhere or not very far. So maybe currently you might have to just put the aspiration on hold, and maybe this is a good time to do a self-retreat at home. Keep the 8 precepts, listen to teachings online and so on until things change. But in every country in the West, or many, many countries in the West now, there are more and more Buddhist centers, meditation, monasteries for women as well as for men. both in the Theravada tradition, Mahayana tradition. We're obviously the Ajahn Chah lineage, so there are a number of the Ajahn Chah monasteries that offer ordination to women. If you go to Asia, many very well established monasteries, hermitages, places of practice for women who want to ordain and train. Again, both Mahayana, Theravada. I would recommend, if you have that aspiration, then to seek out somewhere where the people have experience. Usually where there's a sangha of women living together, because they have a body of experience that they can pass on to you. The obstacles that you have to go through to practice as an ordained person, whether monk or nun, the principles are the same. You're going to have a lot of obstacles changing from your old lay habits into the habits of an ordained one, giving up past attachments, living with simplicity and so on. There's many things you have to learn and get used to. So a sangha with people who are experienced is invaluable to this. Sometimes you see people get their ordination, they go a place, give an ordination, and off they go. They don't stay around to train. Whether you're a monk or a nun, I wouldn't recommend that, because generally they don't do so well in the practice. Better to train with a teacher, with a sangha, give up to a training. If you just go on your own and you're trying to teach yourself, you'll tend to just be full of inexperience, wrong views, and you can actually make trouble for yourself without realizing. So I wouldn't recommend it, normally speaking. Better to find a sangha. And sometimes the only way to find that is through experimenting. So again, at this time, it's not so easy to go off to different places and experiment, but if that does arise, that opportunity, we'll go and spend time in places, get to know a teacher or a sangha and see if it suits your character, and you find you get peaceful and get wisdom in such a place. And you maybe go to a few places and compare. My main experience is from Thailand, having practiced there. And Thailand has many, many monastic communities for nuns, for women, and also for lay women on 8 precepts, even where the teacher is an 8 precept lay practitioner, but also where there are 8 precept nuns, 10 precept nuns, and nowadays there are also bhikkhuni centers arising. I would go, if you get the chance, whether it's to Thailand, Sri Lanka, Burma, Taiwan, there are these places, go and see what it's like. Test the water for a few months at least in a place, see what it's like. That's one aspect of your sort of search for enlightenment. You have to make effort to go and find teachers, find communities, practice. I once traveled to Taiwan, where they have a long tradition of monasticism. They actually have more ordained nuns than they do monks in Taiwan. And some of their monasteries I found very inspiring, the way they train, the depth of knowledge, experience, the support you get. As a Theravada monk, when I went to visit those nuns communities in Taiwan, I did find most of the questions were relating to, they were trying to find out more about the practice of vipassana. Maybe that side of our practice, meditation and the practice of vipassana and developing insight, is not so emphasized. There's a lot more emphasis on social work, helping others, which is very good. But wherever you are, you want to develop the Eightfold Path. So practicing, developing mindfulness, sila, samadhi, panya, mindfulness and wisdom. And some of the teachers I've met in Thailand, and the one that people most often quote in our forest tradition is Meiji Gyel, who's considered enlightened. But there are many, many other well-practiced nuns in the forest tradition. Some nuns' communities are very quiet. Nobody would know them outside of their locality. But just because they're quiet and kind of practicing very anonymously Doesn't mean to say that they haven't progressed or developed samadhi or developed insight. There are such communities where there are nuns practicing very well, but often they're not that well known. One of the ones who was more well known, other than Menchi Gel, Upasika Gi, Khao Suan Luang, whose books have been translated into English, so you can look her up on the internet. She passed away many years ago, but her teachings are still there, and she was well respected. Lumpur Buddhadasa used to praise her. She practiced as an 8-precept nun, which is probably the most commonly found kinds of nun mode of practice in Thailand, but often the 8-precept nuns will not use money, so they've given up their use of money even though they're called 8-precept nuns. And she, if you read her books, she talks just like any other enlightened monk or nun, very, very deep, profound Dhamma. And she's well known for being very well, so committed to the Dhamma, even from when she was a child. Like when she was a child, her mother brought her up to meditate on loving kindness and chant in praise of the Buddha before going to bed. And that became such a habit for her that after a year or two, when she was 5 or 6 years old, she couldn't go to sleep if she didn't do her chanting. So if she fell asleep, she said she'd wake up and have to do the chanting before she went back to sleep, because she just didn't feel right if she didn't praise the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha and do the loving kindness meditation. That's a very good way to bring kids up. And then when she was 7, she was given pocket money to go and buy sweets or food in the day, but she'd never spend it on that. She'd always buy flowers and take it to the temple to put on the shrine. So she's obviously somebody who had a lot of merit, a lot of barami from past lives. When she was a teenager, her relatives and friends tried to take her out to, shows and things that teenagers want to go to. She didn't want to go. She wanted to stay more quiet at home, do chanting and meditation. So it was in her character. And then in her 20s, her family, I think they ran a business, a shop, but she didn't want to do that. Said she was already tired of the lay life at 20. And if you want to become a monk or a nun, you've got to have that sense of world weariness coming up in your mind. You don't really want to pursue the normal worldly life anymore. Family, relationships, making money, making your way in the world. You're starting to tire of that. You're drawn to the monastic life because you want the simplicity and you want to dedicate your efforts to training the mind for letting go of defilements and realizing Nibbana. You have to have that aspiration if you want to be a monastic successfully. You can't just do it on a whim or just an idea. It won't work very well. You have to have some sense of you want to let go of the world. And many of the best nuns like Upasika Gi, they get to the point where they want to be a nun, they don't want to live in the world. And then it's easy. So for her, it wasn't easy, especially in those days. There were a lot less opportunities for women to practice in monastic communities. She started her own. She had an uncle who lived on a hill. He was a farmer, I think he had an orchard, but she would visit him, and this hill at that time was, it's uninhabited hill, probably just wild forest. So she used to go up there and practice when staying with her uncle, practice meditation, and gradually she started a little hermitage. And because she was so dedicated to the practice, other women came to join her. So after a while she did form a nuns community living on that hill, which is still there today. They still have the nuns community, even though she's passed away. And she actually gradually went blind. So if you see pictures of her, you'll see she always wears dark glasses in her later life. So she was completely blind, but she used her mindfulness practice to move around the monastery. She used ropes and handrails. She had one coconut half a coconut as her food bowl and as a scoop to bathe herself, to bathe the water. She just used this one coconut. So she lived very simply, didn't want to accumulate any wealth, didn't want to get distracted from the practice. And that was one of the reasons people respected her so much, and she attracted so many meditators to come and study and live with her. She was just totally dedicated to the Dhamma, not interested in anything else. And she lived very simply and meditated and was praised by many, many great teachers of the time. And luckily some of her teachings are translated into English, so you can look them up online. So Asia, there are many communities you could at least go and visit when the chance comes, just to get some experience. And then in the Western countries there are a growing number of institutions you could go, but try and find a Sangha and stay with that Sangha, give yourself up to that Sangha. It's the best way to erode your ego, your attachment to self and wrong views. Living with a Sangha that has a good standard of discipline and dedicated to the practice. I think you'll find that's the best solution. So maybe that's enough for tonight. We can talk more on this subject or other subjects another time, but hopefully if there's been anything useful I've said tonight, that's good. Take it away, have a think about it, and we'll see you again next time and wish you well.
Handamayang Dhammakataya Sadhu Karang Dadamase Sadhu Sadhu Sadhu